how to avoid common mistakes with proof of funds for a Canadian study permit. Welcome to our YouTube channel. My name is Florence Akpan. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, and today I will be talking to you about common mistakes that you can avoid when you're applying for a study permit that has to do with your proof of funds application. If you're planning to study in Canada, you need to provide proof of funds to support your stay in Canada. But did you know that a lot of people actually get refused because of their proof of funds, inconsistencies, errors, and things that the visa officers don't like about their proof of funds documents? So in today's video, I'll be walking you through about those 5 common mistakes that we have noticed in practice that applicants do make that affects the result of their application. I'll also be talking to you about how to calculate your proof of funds. We'll discuss who can fund your studies in Canada, and we'll also talk about documentation surrounding your proof of funds application. Now, if you're applying for a study permit, you should watch this video to the end because you really don't want to make any of these mistakes. So before I really start talking about the common mistakes that we have seen and things like that, it's important to know how to calculate your proof of funds. So how can you calculate your proof of funds? Many times applicants think proof of funds only has to do with the tuition fee, and they're so worried about tuition fee, how much is the cost? But what you need to know is that your proof of funds is beyond your tuition fee. IRCC will be looking to see that you have enough money to cover your tuition, you have enough money to cover your living expense, and you also have enough money to cover your transportation to Canada. So let's take a simple example. An applicant who is coming for a 1-year program that is $20,000, and they are coming by themselves to Canada. So if tuition fee is $20,000, IRCC expects you to have a minimum of 10,000 Canadian dollars if you're schooling anywhere outside Quebec. And then you have to think about your transportation, depending on where you're coming from. Let's take, for example, $2,000 for your flight ticket. So 20,000 plus 10,000 plus 2,000 gets us to a minimum of 32,000 Canadian dollars. So if you're coming, that is where you should be starting. You should have a minimum of 32,000 Canadian dollars for that 1-year program that you're coming for. So that's how you calculate your proof of funds. Now, the other things you need to think about when you're calculating your proof of funds is how long is the program? So if you're coming for a 2-year program, then you have to look at each of those costs I just talked about again and double whatever that would work out to be. The tuition fee, living expense for the 2nd year, and all of those types of things. So that is for you who is coming for more than 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or even 4-year program. Now, if you're coming with a family, that calculation goes up as well, because for every accompanied dependent, there's an additional cost to your proof of funds that you have to worry about. So you have to think about your tuition fee. So let's assume that applicant who is coming for a 1-year program is coming with a family now. They have to think about the additional costs associated with the family member coming. So remember, just that applicant for 1 year was 32,000. Now, if that applicant is coming with a spouse, there's an additional $4,000 that comes in, plus an additional $2,000 for flight ticket for that spouse. So you're already looking at an additional $6,000. So coming with your spouse alone moves your proof of funds from 32,000, which was just for you, to $38,000. Now, if you have a child and you're coming, for every accompanied dependent after the first one is additional $3,000. So if you have a child coming along, plus the $3,000 plus the $2,000 for flight for that child that will be accompanying, another $5,000. And these are all estimates, right? But $5,000 plus $38,000 we already calculated, you're already sitting at a minimum of 43,000 Canadian dollars. This is how you calculate your proof of funds. And when you pull it together this way, at least you know the minimum that you need to start with. And under no circumstances should you submit an application that is less than the minimum, because that would be an easy refusal for the visa officer, because obviously you don't have sufficient funds for the planned study that you're coming for in Canada. So what can you do? Now you know how to calculate it. It is important to research the right schools and find exactly what their tuition fees are. It's also important to know that if you're coming for a program that is more than 1 year, even though IRCC on their website would expect you to show a minimum of 1 year tuition fee, the officers will still be looking at your source of funding to determine if you can sponsor yourself for the remainder of the tuition for the remainder of your program. So it's important to know what that total cost is and double check your calculation. If you're also living in a country with high fluctuation in the currency, you need to build that in as well. If you're calculating today and maybe 50 million is going to get you 43,000 Canadian, then you want to put a buffer in case your currency is fluctuating a lot to be able to adjust. If by the time your visa comes through, things have changed, currencies have fluctuated, you have enough room to adjust for any of those unforeseen circumstances. So the next thing we're going to talk about, now we know how much you need, you know how to calculate the funds that you want. The second thing is, who can sponsor your studies to Canada? There's a lot of people that can sponsor your studies to Canada, and I'm just going to list a couple of them. This is not going to be a comprehensive list, but here's a list of people who can sponsor your studies to Canada. It could be you, it could be yourself. We've had students who have sponsored themselves all by themselves through their life savings, through their businesses and employment and things like that. They've been able to raise the funds to study in Canada. Parents are amazing sponsors to Canada. My parents sponsored me to study in Canada, and I do have a lot of clients as well who their parents have sponsored them to study in Canada. A spouse, if you're married or you're in common law relationship, your spouse or common law partner could sponsor your studies to Canada as well. Close relatives. We've had clients who have used their uncles, their in-laws, their cousins, aunties, siblings, and all who have all been a part of sponsoring studies in Canada. So these are all viable options that can be used to sponsor studies. Businesses, if you own a business and you're looking to come study in Canada, your business could sponsor your studies in Canada as well. Employers, if you're working for a company who will be benefiting from your education in Canada, they could sponsor your studies to Canada as well. Government agencies, countries, governments from different countries sometimes do sponsor studies to Canada as well. And of course, the last one I want to mention today, last but not the least, are loans. You could get loans from financial institutions to support your planned studies to Canada. Now you know how much you need, you know who can sponsor you, what is acceptable. What are the acceptable types of proof of funds? And that's what we're going to talk about now. Cash, stocks, bonds, guaranteed investment certificates, mutual funds are popular ways and most common ways that applicants show proof of funds for their studies in Canada. The thing that you should think about when you're thinking about your source of funding to study in Canada is this money going to be available when I'm starting school? So if you're to start school in September, you want to know that by the time it's September, I will be able to access these funds to study in Canada. And IRCC will be looking at your documents that you submit to determine if you can access those funds. So the types of funds that are highly acceptable are highly liquidable sources of funds that you have. So if you have investment, let it be that you could liquidate those investments by the time that you are coming to study in Canada as well in your application. So cash, stock, bonds, guaranteed investments, mutual funds, those are the popular ways that applicants have shown their proof of funds. Fixed deposit, treasury bills, those are common ways that applicants have shown proof of funds for their study permit application to Canada. Keep in mind that assets. So a lot of times applicants will tell us, I own a house, I have a car. Could I show that as my proof of funds? Until you have sold this asset, it is difficult for the officer to determine exactly how much you would be able to make from the sale of that asset. So therefore, it is typically not considered and it's not something that we would advise our clients to use as proof of funds. If you're looking to use any of these assets for your proof of funds, it is advisable to actually get it sold and then have the documentation to support that for your proof of funds application. So we are here. Here are the 5 common mistakes you have to avoid when you're submitting your application for a study permit. Now we know how much you need, who can sponsor, what is acceptable. So why is it that there's still mistakes? Why is it that people are still having issues with proof of funds? And I'm going to show you and talk to you about common mistakes that applicants make with their proof of funds documents. The first one, submitting false or fake bank statement. Yes, I said that. We have seen so many situations where clients have come to us and it turns out that a fake bank statement was submitted. We also have applicants who come to us sometimes and ask if we can provide proof of funds documentation for an application. And we always say outright, we're not financial institution. InfoPlace Canada is an immigration consulting firm and not a financial institution, and therefore we cannot provide you documents that you need for your application. We expect our clients to bring their documents for the application processing. However, there are people who rely on strangers to provide all the documents that are needed in their application. And this sometimes leads to fake documentation being submitted. I have a case where a client had contacted us after being refused, and we requested the GCMS notes, the detailed immigration officer's note, to understand why the application was refused. And it turned out that the bank statement that was included in this client's application had been included in about 11 other applications by the agent that they had used. So this led to the ban of this client. So if you submit any fake documents in your application, not just financial documents, it could lead to not just a refusal, but up to a 5-year ban from applying for any Canadian immigration program. So ensure that your documentation are solid, they're genuine, and they're accurate as can be, because IRCC does contact the banks to verify bank statements as well. And this is what a lot of people don't know. So you have to be careful and ensure that you're coming through clean in your application submission. So don't submit fake documents. Don't submit false financial documents in your application. Number 2, large deposits without proper explanation. Another mistake that applicants have to avoid is ensuring that large deposits that show up in your financial documents before you submit an application should be explained. IRCC doesn't typically like to see large unexplained deposits. If you have large deposits in your account, ensure that you're explaining this deposit so the visa officer knows exactly what those funds are and can determine if those funds are actually available for you. If the visa officer cannot determine the source of that large deposit, your application could be refused because they would assume that those funds are truly not yours, but just set up in the account for the purposes of the application. The third reason is sometimes not clearly articulating the source of your funds. It is one thing, and we say this all of the time if you follow us on all of our other social media pages, IRCC is not all about seeing money. Yes, they love money. The funds that I talked about at the beginning, that should be the minimum you have for your application. But one of the things that they look at the most is, where did you get the money from? So the source of your funds has to be clearly articulated in your application, because this makes the visa officer feel a lot more comfortable about the application, about the source, about the availability and the accessibility of the funds that you're showing in the financial documents that you're providing. So the source of the funds have to be clearly articulated. So was the funds, for example, if you're self-sponsored, did you raise these funds through investment? Did you raise it through employment? Did you raise it through your business? Whoever your sponsor is has to be able to show this, and you need to provide supporting documents for this as well in your application. Remember, it needs to be reasonable. So you cannot, if you're making $1,000 a year and you've only worked for 1 year and you're providing financial documents that have $10,000 and you're saying you are funding yourself, financial statement that has $20,000 and you've only worked for a year, IRCC will be questioning that, because it's not possible that your $1,000 never got spent, you saved it all. If that happened, you need to really explain it to the visa officer as well. So reasonability is something that you really need to think about when you're putting your proof of funds together, and clearly articulating the source of your funds in your application so that the visa officer knows where those funds came from. Next common mistakes that applicants make is something that I call disappearing proof of funds. I'm sure you're wondering what that means. Yes, sometimes proof of funds disappear. So these are situations where applicants submit bank statements, very robust bank statements that have lots of money in it. They submit it for the application. And if you have been around and worked with IRCC for a while, you'll know that sometimes these applications could take really long. We have had clients' applications that take up to a year for us to receive a decision. And we've had those ones that, of course, come through in 2 weeks, which is fantastic. But the truth is, when you're putting your application together, you have to prepare for the long haul. The funds that you show for your studies in Canada should be designated, should not be funds that you use for anything. So when these applications delay, sometimes IRCC would come back and ask for updated bank statement. And if you don't have updated bank statement at the time of the request, your application could be refused. If you provide the updated bank statement and the proof of funds has disappeared, that could lead to a refusal. And sometimes I have had situations where it even led to a ban, because IRCC considered that fraud, that you showed bank statement that was not real, and then now you don't have the money again. So it is very important when you're embarking on this journey to think about it, that the funds are not just supposed to be for show. The government is checking to ensure that these funds will be available, because it is expensive to live and study in Canada. So as much as you can, ensure that you have these funds and you can live without these funds while you're waiting for a decision, and have it with you as you come to Canada, because it's really, really going to be crucial to your transition into Canada as well. Honestly, there are so many little things and issues that could happen and come up in an application that have led to refusals that we've seen. Like, if I wanted to go on, I could go on for hours, given my experience and what my team and I have seen. But I just want to talk about the last one today, which is the number 5 point, which is the quality of the financial documents that you're submitting. Applicants sometimes submit documents that are not legible. And if you know IRCC, there's no patience, there's no phone call to, there's no person to call. There's even no interview through the application process where you would say, when I get there, I'll explain to them, I'll tell them what that number means. No, your documents have to be high quality, properly scanned, properly labeled, put together in a neat format so that the visa officer is able to clearly understand your source of funds. The officer is able to clearly see exactly how much you have available. If your bank statements are not clear, they were not scanned properly, very poor quality, difficult to read, it could lead to a refusal. An impatient officers who have to move on to other things, could just finally close your file and refuse it and say, nope, I couldn't see enough funds, and they wouldn't be wrong if they could not read your documents that you provided. So it's very important to ensure that the documents that you're including in your application are very legible and very easy to read for the visa officer as well. So in conclusion, we've talked about a lot today, and proof of funds is just one key section of a study permit application. If you check on our YouTube channel, I'll probably pop up the video here. I have a video about top 3 things that you should know about a study permit when packaging a study permit to Canada. I recently have a video up on writing and drafting a winning study plan. You should check that out. There's so many other key components to a study permit application. If you don't know what these are, you should prepare yourself for this. And one of the reasons why we always tell clients that studying in Canada could take up to 1 year to plan to actually achieve your goal is because it is not an overnight thing. Most of these things that I've discussed in this video, you would need to sit down and plan with your team, with your sponsors, with your parents, with your family, to ensure that you will have the right documentation when the time comes for your study permit application. And this is what we usually do for our clients during our consultations. During our consultations at InfoPlace Canada, we would work with you to determine what you need based on your own unique profile, the types of documents that would need to be seen in the application process. We would be able to answer questions around any complexity around proof of funds, how you want to show the funds and things like that. We work with you to find the way that would be the easiest for the officer to be convinced that you have enough money and show that you do have enough money for your application. Those 5 common mistakes I talked about, if you can work on avoiding those mistakes in your application, you will significantly increase the likelihood of your application being approved. Of course, that's in conjunction with the rest of the tips and all of the other things that relate to a study permit application. We have a detailed study permit course that is available. If you are not sure where to start and you feel like, oh my God, this is a whole lot, you could actually check this video out, because we even go more in depth and answer questions that most people have around study permits application, not just proof of funds, but every aspect of study permits application. There'll be a link in the description box as well where you can access this. So once again, this is from me, and keep me posted, share with us, leave comments, share your experience with study permits application, and most importantly, follow us on all our social media channel. And if you have not subscribed, you should subscribe to our channel. Subscribe and hit the bell notification button as well. And I look forward to seeing you on my next video. Thank you.